Welcome back to Sensitivity Sessions. I'm Stephanie Gardner-Wright, and today we're talking about how to start embracing our differences as sensitive folks, being okay with and maybe even celebrating your differences. Coincidentally, as I'm recording this, maybe perhaps not so coincidentally, it happens to be Neurodiversity Celebration Week. So just want to acknowledge all of the wonderful diversity within neurotypes, neurodiversity referring to the range of natural variants that we have in terms of how people's brains are wired and their neurological systems, and how neurodivergent folks who tend to diverge from typical norm can include highly sensitive people, autistic folks, ADHDers, people that have BPD, and other ways of having brain differences that can really shape our experiences in the world and make us feel very different. So while this is a podcast where we typically talk about high sensitivity in general, we also are acknowledging within that there's a broad array of neurotypes within the high sensitivity community. So highly sensitive people being about 20 to 30% of the population. That's what the current research is showing. And we know within that there's a lot of variance. So there's room for a lot of folks within the highly sensitive umbrella and within the neurodivergent umbrella. It's important to talk about neurodivergence and neurodiversity because this is a key part of why we can feel different and excluded from other folks, sometimes for the entirety of our lives. So when we have a different neurotype and we're in that minority of how our brains are wired and it's not typical, it's a normal human variance, but it's not typical to the majority of folks that have a different neurotype, we can feel alienated, isolated, and like people don't understand us. And this can result in physical ramifications if we have driven ourselves past the point of our body and system's capacity, especially as sensitive people. It can really wreak havoc on our physical bodies. And we can end up feeling too much, but not enough at the same time, which is a weird paradox that many sensitive people can relate to. So by too much, I mean feeling that your emotions are too large, that you tend to get overstimulated more easily than other people, a sense that other people maybe don't quite know what to do with you or how to handle you. And that either could be true. People may be feeling that way. They don't know how to deal with intense emotions, or they maybe are not skilled in holding that space, or it can be something that we've experienced in childhood and perhaps isn't currently happening in our lives, but we have that feeling remaining with us, which is very powerful. So that's a way that we can feel too much. Now, about feeling like we're too little at the same time, that has to do with feeling like we're a square peg in a round hole, that it doesn't quite fit. And the reason why it doesn't quite fit is because we are living in a world that was not created for us. So it was not created for people that are highly sensitive. It's not created for people with other neurodivergences. The world is facilitated mainly by neurotypical people, and there's nothing wrong with neurotypical folks, but at the same time, it does leave out people that have a different type of way that their brain works and different support needs even. This can lead us to feel like the problem is with us, instead of perhaps with society, at least in part, that society is not equipped or is not willing and able to make those changes for folks that are operating differently. So let me lay out a typical experience. Of course, everyone is different, but this is a common experience that a lot of sensitive folks have, of really trying to shoehorn themselves into this mold that they think they need to fit. So always doing more, always taking on more, always running to the next thing because we feel like that's what's expected of us, that to do that means to fit in, to conform, to be accepted even. And the problem with this is that with our sensitive nervous systems and our sensitive brains, whole system being sensitive, this is not well suited for us. We need built-in rest time. We need built-in time to reflect and be able to process, not because we're unable to process all of the things that are coming at us, but because we do require more time and more space to be able to thoroughly process those, because that's a feature of high sensitivity, is the deep and thorough processing that happens. If you're someone who is multiply neurodivergent, and what I mean by that is you have multiple forms of neurodivergence, which I think personally is more common than we currently realize. Research tends to lag behind about 5 to 10 years, and it'll be interesting to see what research might occur and kind of pop up in the next 5 to 10 years about multiple neurodivergences. So if you are someone who has multiple divergences, then you may doubly or triply feel this. So for example, if you have a learning disability, or if you have CPTSD, chronic PTSD, those are examples of ways that folks can have neurodivergence. And if you have that along with the trait of high sensitivity, there are kind of multiple layers that you're navigating, multiple ways that you may be hiding who you are and even masking who you are in order to be accepted or to experience success in the way that our world has currently defined it. So a lot of this is really difficult to begin untangling. Often when we realize that we have the trait of high sensitivity, and or we maybe are on a journey of discovering their neurodivergence that's co-occurring with that, there may be some excitement, some relief of like, oh my goodness, finally, this explains why I've always felt so different. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not broken. This is the reason why. And that's a wonderful stage in the journey, and that's something to celebrate. And then there tends to be a reckoning where we really have to face, how are we living our lives in a way that is not set up to support our sensitivity? So I'll go into a personal example here. As a therapist early in my career, I did the typical thing that most of us do. I worked in agencies. So I worked in nonprofits. I worked in outpatient mental health, seeing a variety of concerns that people would come in with. And most of them were very intense. I worked with a lot of traumatized kids and a lot of people that had a lot of significant challenges in their lives. So it was intense work, and I had a very heavy client load. The goal was to be at 100% productivity. Now, if you work with people and you also have paperwork to do, you're in the health industry, you know how impossible that task is. You can't be at 100% productivity. You're going to end up working overtime. So I was very busy, and it was not a good fit for me. I actually had a significant health crisis, not once, but several times. And it wasn't until becoming a parent and being forced to slow down, both for my child and also for my own health, that I really began to look at things in a different way. I began to make plans to do something different that would support my need for more slowness in my life, for more reflection, not having to commute, all of those things. So I started my own business and I started my own practice, and I haven't looked back since. It's been a wonderful journey. And my point in sharing that is that my pace of life has slowed down a lot. I'm not working late into the evenings anymore like I used to. I used to think that you had to do that to be a therapist, but that isn't true at all. And there were a lot of other things not related to work that I found I was just going along with. I felt like I had to be really productive all the time. I'll be honest with you, that's something that I still struggle with in terms of winding that back, of needing to be productive all day in order to deserve rest. By the way, a shout out to the Nap Ministry. Please follow her account. She's the original in terms of theorizing on rest as resistance. As we get along further on our self-knowledge journey as sensitive people, if we're just realizing it, or maybe we have a new understanding of it, we're trying to support it in a new way, what we might start to realize is we need more sleep. We're really deeply affected if we don't get enough sleep. And if we have no white space in our day, things can be really, really hard. It's very difficult on our nervous systems to be constantly going without any downtime. We tend to get overstimulated when that happens, and there's no time for us to rest or catch our breath, for our nervous system to go back to baseline. And that's when, if you caught my last episode on overstimulation, that's when our nervous system can tend to get stuck in that overstimulated mode. And that also happens with chronic trauma, by the way. But that can happen to where we can't come down out of that overstimulation. And it's almost like we get stuck at that setting. So that has very negative ramifications for health Gabor Mate has a lot of great resources and books on the stress-disease connection that I'd recommend if you're interested in that further. But what we need to know for now is just that our systems are very attuned and very responsive to stress. And so we need to think about how we can create more space in our lives. And this can look like a real clearing in some ways. It might mean walking away from some relationships that are not well suited to us. And don't mishear me. I don't mean that we need to cut people out of our lives that we disagree with on fundamental issues or that we otherwise maybe struggle to get along with. But if you have relationships in your life that are not feeling valuable, or they're feeling like it's very one-sided and there's no reason for you to stay, maybe you've outgrown the relationship, then perhaps those are relationships that you naturally let go. And perhaps there's other changes that you make in terms of your career or how you schedule your day, and depending on the flexibility that you have with your work. Maybe you are saying no to social events more often. And maybe this sounds a little grim. It's not all about saying no to things. It's also about saying yes to more of the things that fill you up and give you energy. It's about being more attentive to your health in whatever way that looks like to you. Maybe that's taking your vitamins every day. Maybe that's just feeling the sun in your face and going for a walk for 15 minutes around the block. Whatever that means to you, but we do have an extra need to care for our whole systems as sensitive people. We're kind of like the canaries in the coal mine, where everyone on the face of the planet Earth, regardless of their neurotype, struggles with stress, but we are more responsive to stress. And so what's not good for everyone will be more quickly noted by us and as sensitive people. So lifestyle changes are a big part of the sensitive journey, and realizing what we might need to change or tweak a little bit. We might really need to start looking at how we address conflict and set boundaries in our relationships. Again, not to cut important people out of our lives if they can't immediately get it, but to be more aware of how we're presenting ourselves and how we're responding. A way that I believe as a therapist that sensitive people can often deal with the challenges and honestly sometimes the chronic trauma of a highly sensitive or multiply divergent person in the world is by fawning. So fawning is a trauma response that we've known about for a few years now. And people often know about fight, flight, even freeze, but fawn is the other response where we are in constant people pleaser mode. We're trying to make it all okay. We're trying to make ourselves as inoffensive and unobjectionable as possible for survival. And while there's really good reasons why we've done that and maybe still continue to do that, it really wreaks havoc on our systems, our nervous system, our physical system, again, with that stress-disease connection. When we are holding this stress within us and we're not expressing our emotions, or we're not aware of our emotions enough to express them, it can actually cause physical manifestations. So one instance would be, gastro issues if you have IBS, or it can be related to autoimmune disorders. And again, this is complex stuff. So I'm not saying that not dealing with your feelings automatically equates to developing a physical condition, but it is a pipeline that we need to be aware of. And so the stakes can be pretty high here. When we've been in that fawn mode for so long, where we put other people's needs before our own consistently, and sometimes we do need to put other people's needs before our own. That's part of altruism, right? But when we're constantly doing that, and that's our go-to response, then it becomes less about altruism and more about a survival mechanism. So becoming aware of how we're responding to others in our lives, if we have appropriate boundaries for ourselves, is all part of lifestyle changes in being a highly sensitive person, and being able to create more space, emotional space with your time, and also space for your body to heal if you've been chronically overstimulated, because that can absolutely affect your adrenal functioning. It can make your cortisol levels really wonky, which can affect your sleep. If your cortisol cycle gets kind of reversed in a way where it spikes at night, these are all things that can happen because of chronic stress. And most of us that are highly sensitive, operating in the world, the way that we're told we're supposed to be, of being at a 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 job and then going to 2 or 3 things in the evening and getting home at 9 p.m. That is not a lifestyle that is suited for most highly sensitive people. Even if you're high sensation seeking, you need buffer time in there. So that's important to think about. The other aspect that might be not anticipated of learning to honestly look at our sensitivity and see the differences there and how we maybe will never be able to operate like neurotypical folks in the world. That can involve some grief and some mourning for parts of ourselves that we thought that we would experience going forward, but really are not possible, or things that are now gone. So ways of being that are maybe not open to us anymore. So there can really be some mourning in looking at that and realizing that that is never going to be for us. So if you're on that part of the journey, be gentle with yourself. Know that grief is a normal process when your identity and your understanding of yourself is shifting, when you're needing to make small changes or big changes in your life to feel better and feel more authentic to you. There can be some grief involved for what's going, especially if there's some relationships that are going by the wayside, or you're having to say goodbye to some commitments that maybe weren't the best suited to you, but also they've become a routine that you're used to. So just know that that is absolutely a normal part of embracing your differences as a highly sensitive person or a person that is otherwise neurodivergent, and seeing that there are other ways of being in the world, but that the typical rat race, pedal to the metal is probably not for you. And doing this all alone can be hard. So often when we're on this journey, we feel alone, we feel unsupported, or like our partners or families don't understand. And if you can get them on board and explain to them and they're supportive, great, but that's not possible for everyone. And even if it is possible, we might need more support than that. So feeling like you can reach out to a community, whether that's joining online communities of highly sensitive or neurodivergent folks, whether that's reading some books and getting inspired that way and going from there. Maybe there's some support groups that you can look into, or finding a therapist that specializes in high sensitivity or forms of neurodivergence and affirms you instead of telling you that you're not doing enough or you need to do more of this, because that's often very unhelpful messaging that most of us have received in one way or another. So that can be really healing and feel really validating to be told that, whether by a therapist person or someone else, whether that's online, listening to podcasts, where you can feel not alone. It's a very important thing, however that shows up for you, to feel like you're not alone in this, because you're absolutely not. Before we end for today, let's talk about what can wait for us on the other side of self-acceptance, or just being okay with ourselves as sensitive and neurodivergent people. So accepting ourselves can release so much energy of trying to fit in, of trying to jam that square peg into the round hole and feel like we're just banging our heads against the wall. That's so much energy that's constantly leaking out all the time that we don't really realize how exhausting that is until we're not doing it, until we can feel a different state of being. So I would encourage you to look actively for those moments when you feel at ease. Maybe that's when you're petting your cat. Maybe that's when you're taking a walk outside, or playing with your kids, whatever that may be, making something, reading a book that you really enjoy. But try to notice when you feel at ease, you feel comfortable and relaxed in who you are, and look for ways that you can expand those little slivers of time into something greater, because that's a way in. If we haven't felt that sensation of feeling okay with ourselves in a long time, or maybe ever, that's a way in that we can find to begin knowing what that feels like, and then looking for more ways that we can feel that way. Because when we can be okay with ourselves as sensitive folks, and when we can accept ourselves, then we aren't running uphill all the time. We're hopefully more okay with letting some things go, of really streamlining our lives in a way that makes sense to us, to building in more downtime and more reflection time to support our sensitive nervous systems and that deep processing. So when we attend to our needs as sensitive people, we actually are reducing our overall allostatic load of chronic stress. And what that means is that then our body can more easily fight off infections. We can be less sick all the time because we're trying less hard to fit into a lifestyle that doesn't work for us. So this can really be freeing of a lot of energy and general health in a lot of ways. And it can be scary to start this journey, to acknowledge that we're different, to start changing our lives and maybe risking other people noticing that we're changing our lives, and even in small ways, and needing to explain that feeling potentially of feeling exposed or vulnerable. These can all be really scary, terrifying things. So I just want to validate that if that's something that you're feeling or you're starting to feel as you listen to this, if you're starting to feel overwhelmed in any way, just take it slow. And know that you don't have to do this all overnight. This is a process, typically over years, where you're finding what works for you. You're giving yourself a little more grace to do things in a way that supports you best, and figuring out what that looks like for you, because everyone is different. Even if they have a sensitive nervous system, the way that folks experience that and their needs are going to vary. So just be gentle and be patient with yourself. It's always the refrain that I come back to, I know, but it's for a reason, because this is absolutely a process, and it's not a sudden magic wand, even if you're aware of the changes that might need to be made. So go slow, and I'm rooting for you always in your journey to accepting who you are as a sensitive person. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this and found it valuable, and I will see you on the next episode of Sensitivity Sessions. Bye for now.